You need to know what to do with that dough. Let the chef show you. You need to know what to do with that dough. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Need to Know Pod with me, your girl Chef Sahara. And in today's podcast, this episode, we're going to discuss the ingredients, some of the most commonly used ingredients that we use in baking, and just kind of giving you an idea of. We're not going to go through all the ingredients, but just giving you some ideas on how to differentiate um, the different ingredients, right? There's so many different flours out there. There are different sugars out there, so I hope my goal is to come across as not so much like you're in school and let me tell you about this, but so I just want to cover some of the things that the basic stuff that I found that people have a little confusion about, some of the stuff that people are a little confused about, like the sugars, right? All sugars are not the same, so just a better idea on what sugars you should use and why, what flours you should use and why. Um, yeah, and like the difference between baking soda and baking powder, right? So just want to go over that. And yeah, guys, so let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about are the sugars. I like to tackle sugar first because it's one of the first ingredients. If we think of making cakes, it's the cakes that you make when you cream your butter and your sugar together, right? So let's tackle the sugar. So, of course, we know that you have your granulated sugar, and I'll probably just discuss the most commonly used sugars. You have granulated sugar, you have the confectioner's sugar, or also powdered sugar. In the baking world, we call it 10x sugar, as well as you have your light and dark brown sugar. Um, you have your sugars in a raw. I do like that to top my muffins. Um, and when it comes to decorating, you have like sanding sugar. You have sanding sugar. You also have coarse sugar. I think that's about it. I think that's it. Yeah. So of course the granulated sugar is the regular sugar that we come across in uh your regular sugar, right? Your table sugar, the sugar you use for your coffee and stuff like that. So the reason why we use sugar, specifically this, when we start talking about the function of sugar, it's the granulated sugar that I'm speaking of. Um, the granulated sugar allows us, of course, it's sweet and stuff, but sugar also holds moisture. Sugar also holds moisture. So when you mix your sugar and your butter together, there's something going on with that butter and that sugar, right? That allows it to have air pockets that allows that sugar to hold on to that moisture. Um, Sugar tenderizes. We use sugar to tenderize our products. Sugar also helps us to leaven our products. So I just want to give you a little bit of the function. So when people decide that I want a sugar-free dessert, these are some of the functions that you are taking out of some of your baked goods when you want to eliminate sugar or substitute the sugar. So sugar, not only is it to sweeten, but when you take it out, you are removing those uh really important functions. Uh Sugar stabilizes. We see this when we mix our, let's see, like our um your sugar with like a egg white or meringue, right? We do put a little sugar in there. Egg white is the meringue, but sugar in your heavy cream, it stabilizes. If you just whip up egg whites with no sugar, your peaks will not be as firm as if you put sugar in there. But sugar holds it together. I've had an employee make like a muffin mix and something, not a muffin mix, she made some cupcakes. And I knew there was something off about it. It was just something that didn't look right. And she forgot the sugar. She forgot the sugar. So I didn't even have to taste it, but it couldn't support it, right? There was no sugar. So sugar definitely uh stabilizes. And without that sugar, I could see that first of all, you won't have the same product. So just yeah, there's that. There's that. We use the sugar to garnish. That's when we talk about like our sand and sugars, sugars that have sugar crystals are a little bit larger. You can use that to garnish as well. And in terms of our yeasted products, like our breads or our danishes, we use sugar because the yeast feed off of the sugar. Sugar is like the food for the yeast. So you will see a lot of recipes that call for yeast that also call for not call for yeast that use yeast will call for some amounts of sugar. We use sugar because it also helps our products brown as it caramelizes. So just really quickly about the granulated sugar. Our confectioner sugar, there are some recipes that use both granulated and confectioner sugar, but for the most part, confectioner sugar or our powdered sugar is used for our icings. We definitely use it to decorate. Um, it can be used as a stabilizer, right? We can use it to thicken stuff up when it's in that powdered form. So if you have an icing that's a little bit too loose or too thin, you add a little more sugar. When you're making royal icing, which is egg whites with some powdered sugar. If it's too thin, again, we add that powdered sugar. So confectioner sugar is definitely like uh, the sugar we use to decorate with, to make icings. To decorate with, that royal icing is used as an icing we can decorate with. You definitely have your light and dark brown sugars, and the difference is just the amount of molasses in the light and dark brown. There's more molasses in the dark brown than it is in the light brown, obviously. But can you use them interchangeably? You can. I don't. For the most part, I just use the light brown sugar. The dark brown sugar will give you a slightly different taste, but also it's gonna give your final product a darker look as well. So I do use dark brown sugar, but for specific recipes like a pumpkin muffin or gingerbread cookies. But light brown sugar is pretty much my go-to. Also because you can buy that in bulk. And I don't think I've seen like big bags of dark brown sugar the way you find light brown sugar. My sugar in the raw, those granules are larger. And I bring up sugar in the raw because I've had somebody ask for a recipe, and when I told them brown sugar, this is the sugar that they wanted to use. This is the sugar that they wanted to use, or the reverse. When if I like this sugar for my coffee, and I've had somebody say, "Oh yeah, I have brown sugar," and they wanted to offer me like the light brown sugar to put in my coffee. So very different, um, very different. So I don't want to get really into the technical aspect on the sugars and how it's produced, and because for the most part, you want to know. I want you to know how to pick what sugar should I be using. You want the raw sugar to garnish. You never want to substitute that kind of sugar or like a sanding sugar or a coarse sugar for a recipe that calls for granulated sugar. It's not the same. The same with the confectioners and the granulated. The sanding sugar typically comes in different colors. It's great to decorate with. If you have a theme, sugar that sanding sugar comes in just about any color imaginable. Great for any event, great for holidays, because whatever holiday it is, believe me when I tell you, you can find it like in the Michaels. If it's Easter, you're gonna see the Easter colors. You're gonna see the Christmas colors, the Halloween colors. So I love sanding sugar, especially when I do decorative cookies or what else would I use it for? I definitely have like a holiday cookie that I use it for, and like for cake pops and stuff like that. So sometimes you can find a coarser sugar that comes in colors. I like that. It depends on what you're using it for. Definitely to decorate. Sometimes the coarser sugar, even though it comes in colors, it's the sand and sugar is a little finer, but not as fine as the granulated sugar. All right. So now we're gonna get into our flour. Let's talk a little bit about the flour. Yeah, okay. We're gonna talk about the flour. um So, of course, again, we have a lot of flowers out there to choose from. And I think this is key because this is just something I didn't know. Even though there's different names of the flowers, never really understood the difference. And I don't feel like I learned this in school. I don't feel like I learned this in school. Not saying that they don't teach it, but it's not something I remember. I just remember we have a recipe. If it called for bread flour, that's the flour we use. Like no explanation why. If the recipe called for cake flour, use the cake flour. But now I understand more that flour has the gluten, right? Flour has gluten in it. And gluten is the protein, right? Let me just be real specific. Gluten is a protein found naturally in the endosperm of wheat. Um, Flour provides structure. That's the function of flour. Flour provides structure, and different baked goods requires different structural support. So, all-purpose flour is like mid-range of the protein spectrum. Let's call it that, the protein spectrum. So you have we'll do from highest to lowest, right? So you have bread flours up here. That's the highest protein level. Then you have bread flour, all-purpose flour, and cake flour. Cake flour has the lowest protein content. Sometimes you don't need that much gluten in your product. So when a recipe calls for cake flour, use cake flour. When it calls for all-purpose flour, um, use all-purpose flour. Bread flour, I have played around with. If a recipe calls for bread flour and I don't have it, I'll use all-purpose flour. I don't necessarily know, depending on what I'm making, that I could tell the difference. But for the most part, I use the flour that the recipe calls for. Now, cake flour, I will not substitute. If a recipe calls for cake flour, I'm going to use cake flour. Um, I remember in school there was a lady who uh she was already baking at home. So, I felt like she was like showing off in school, like, oh, like I just, I'm selling my red velvet cakes specifically. She was selling her red velvet cakes. And I remember when she said she didn't use cake flour. She said, "Oh, I just sift my flour like twice." So that's clearly a sign that you don't understand what the flour is. Just because you sift all purpose flour doesn't decrease the amount of protein um in your flour, right? So you can sift all day, it's still the same amount. But I have done specifically with that red velvet cake, what I do is mix the two flours because I think I need some structure, and cake flour doesn't provide enough structure for my red velvet cake. So I'll do like half all purpose and half cake flour. So that's your tip of the day. You can mix the flours, but you have to really know a recipe and work through it. And that's all about just perfecting your recipe. That's a podcast episode. How to perfect your recipe. I think that is key. A lot of times we want to try to bake everything. There are a lot of things that I can bake. If I looked at a recipe I can make, but I don't, either because I don't know how it should taste, or um there's too many steps involved, or I'm just not passionate about that one thing. The things that I know how to bake really well, I bake really well. And I don't want to bake 15 different items. So there are some things I can make when I have to make it, I make it, but I don't go around just baking just because. We also have self-rising flour. What's his name from what is that? American Idol, Randy Jackson? Yeah, so when it comes to self-rising flour, that's a no for me, though. And that's only because, like, you can have disastrous results with self-rising flour. The only time I use it is to make my husband's, peach cobbler that he wants. It's a quick, easy way to make peach cobbler. The thing about self-rising flour is, number 1, it already has the leavening agent, your baking soda or baking powder. If you use self-rising flour and it calls for baking soda or baking powder, you don't know how much is in there. So if you follow a recipe and you add more baking powder, you add more baking soda, it's just going to increase the leavening effect. right? And what happens is your cake will overflow, right? Your cake will overflow. I had a horrible experience with Presto. This is before I went to school. Presto. I didn't know Presto was self-rising, right? Who knew? And it was just disastrous. And I couldn't understand what went wrong. But I Presto to me was just flour. So that's why I like to just kind of give you a heads up on self-rising flour. I'm never gonna give a recipe with self-rising flour ever unless I make that quick peach cobbler. That's the only time I ever use it. So um this thing called pastry flour, you don't see it too much. Pastry flour is like in between all purpose and cake flour. We use that a lot in school, but when I actually interned in a restaurant, I realized that they didn't use it. Pastry flours is a little pricier. If you can't get your hands on pastry flour, just use all-purpose flour. That's where I would substitute. I would substitute because when I finished school, I was trying to keep up with, doing everything the school said, but it's just not cost effective. Um, and yeah, all-purpose flour works if you have to use pastry flour. You have bleached and unbleached flour. I think I just grab the flour and don't look. Most of our flour you probably pick up is bleached. Unbleached flour just is actually bleached, but it happens naturally. And sometimes you'll find that unbleached flour is a little more pricier because it takes longer to produce. Bleached flour is definitely bleached with I feel like it's peroxide, if I'm not mistaken. Don't hold me to it. Peroxide, but it's bleach with a chemical. It's bleach with a chemical. So just know that you can get unbleached flour, and you can use it interchangeably. So if you have a question, definitely DM me on the social media pages about any of these ingredients. If there's something you're confused about, just let me know. Drop me a line. In wheat flour, I have one recipe for wheat flour. I definitely have one recipe for wheat flour. I don't use it often. But again, I just want you to be really clear on the flours that are out there, why you use them. Now, of course, you have things like almond flour, rice flour. Those things are considered flour because flour is just the pulverization of that grain, so you can find almond flour. Those are the flours that you would use for if you wanted gluten free, right? Gluten free products would use like an almond flour or rice flour because now that is not the flour itself. It's not the flour, not the flour, not the wheat. Gluten is in that wheat, so just know that. I hope that makes sense, guys. Now let's see. Let's talk about our leavening agents. Our leavening agents. So, leavening agents are the things that make your products rise. You can have a chemical leavening agent, you can have uh, a biological leavening agent, as well as a natural leavening agent. The chemical one is the one that we're going to discuss. The biological would be yeast, and the natural one would be steam. When the conditions are right, steam, when you put your baked good in the oven, steam is what allows your products to rise. So there's that. But with today, we're going to talk about the baking soda and the baking powder. What's the difference between the two, and when to use it. Okay, so the baking soda and baking powder are both the chemical leavening agents. One is just a complete one, and one is not, right? So the baking soda actually is let me see, what is that? It says when I say it, my notes, right? The baking soda is a natural alkaline compound, which means that it's not acidic. So when baking soda is combined with an acid, a chemical reaction takes place. And an example of that is if you had baking soda and you added vinegar, right? If you add that vinegar to your baking soda, you get that carbon dioxide, right? That's the chemical reaction that's taking place. And in your baked goods, if you notice, items that call for baking soda will someplace in that recipe has some kind of acid to add to it, and that's how it's activated. So let's say uh let's go back to the red velvet cake, right? The red velvet cake calls for baking soda, not baking powder. All the recipes that I've seen, I'm sure there's some with baking powder, but the recipe that I use in the recipes that I've seen call for baking soda. They also call for vinegar, right? It also calls for buttermilk. So that those are your acids mixing with that compound, right? That alkaline compound mixing with that baking soda. So in order to get that leavening agent, the acid is the vinegar, the acid is the baking soda. Um okay, so your baking powder is a complete leavening agent. Since the acid in baking powder is dry, right? The acid in the baking powder is dry. The baking soda won't react until a liquid is added to it. The baking soda will not react until the liquid is added to it. So whereas some people, have heard people like to make batter ahead of time. I don't suggest that you do that because you have started the chemical process, right? Once you add it in there, it's working. You may not see it working like you see that vinegar in your baking soda, but it's working and it's going to have an effect on your final product. Trust me, I've tried it. If you have a little batter left over, it just doesn't give you the same height, the same oomph. So I definitely wouldn't recommend that. So that's the difference. If you are using a baking powder, it's just going to say milk or something like that. But definitely the thing to look out for if you see something that calls for baking soda, equate that with acid. Where's my acid? Acid takes form of again vinegar, buttermilk, lemon juice. It could be yogurt. It could be some honey. I have seen you it may well, I don't use a lot of stuff that calls for honey, so let's scratch that. But anyway, so stuff like that, sour cream maybe. So just know that when you see baking soda, there should be some kind of acid. Sometimes they put it together. Sometimes you will see a recipe that calls for baking soda and baking powder. You absolutely will because it needs to balance itself out. Let's see. I want to definitely go over butter really quickly. Um, I think butter is important. I'll just tell you this. The one question I get all the time is should I use salted or unsalted? Hands down, you as a baker, you always want to use unsalted butter. I've seen recipes. This one guy, he said he went viral with his recipe because or his video because he broils his cookies and he melts the butter and he melts he melts the salted butter. So that's just a no-no. In baking, we always use salted, but unsalted. I'm sorry. In baking, we always use unsalted butter. And the reason behind that is because, of course, the salted butter has salt, but we don't know how much salt is in there. Most of your bacon recipes, I would say like 95% of your bacon recipes are going to call for salt. So you're adding salt on top of salt. So yeah, bakers just use unsalted butter. You can always add the salt to it, but you can't take it out. So there's that. Also the thing about butter, butter is considered one of the fats. We like to use the butter because it's whippable. You cannot whip shortening, and it melts in your mouth as opposed to shortening. If you ever had a baked good that the crust is supposed to be fresh and you have that slickness that's left on your tongue, that's because they use shortening, I like to think. Lard is also considered a fat. I don't eat that. That's number one, but I would never use that. But it's something that can be used. And this is why more people use the butter and it has a better taste, right? Butter is better. So it has a desirable flavor. So that's why we use butter. Um I think that's it. Well, eggs. Let's go over the eggs really quickly, and then we can wrap up this episode of our ingredients. Um, so eggs again. performs functions. We use the eggs because that definitely creates some structure. And I say all this so when you start taking stuff out, when you want to take out that gluten, that flour from your baked good because you don't want the gluten, just know what you're giving up, right? You're giving up that structure. But some of the functions that eggs perform in your baked goods is structure, right? Uh Eggs helps to leaven our items, our baked goods. Uh Eggs help to tenderize and moisturize our products. We use the eggs as an egg wash. We use the eggs as a color. If you ever made like a fresh custard or my lemon curd is a lot of lemon juice, but also a lot of egg yolks, right? So we get that we use that color. Um, Fun fact: if you ever, I never even knew what a white cake was, but a white cake is just a cake made with egg white, not the whole egg. Who knew? But yeah, once we add that egg to it, now we have a yellow cake. But if you want a white cake, just the egg white. And also the nutrition value, right? The eggs gives us a little nutrition on top of all the other goodness that goes into our baked goods. So just know uh these products, these commonly used ingredients serve a purpose. So I just wanted to give you a better understanding. Lastly, eggs helps to emulsify. Eggs will bring your batter together. um it says eggs are natural emulsifiers that help make our batters smooth, right? It's going to be a difference. There is a recipe, a muffin recipe that I don't use eggs. That's my vegan option. And I use like an egg replacer. It's a powder mixture. I don't use it for everything because sometimes you need that egg to bring it together. But this particular recipe works. So I do, that is the one recipe I could use without the egg. But I've made cookies without it. It tastes okay, but you need that. I like a smooth batter. That egg is playing a very crucial role in our baked goods. Um, and I think that is it, guys. I think that's it for this episode in terms of the ingredients. Again, I want to encourage you to send in your baking questions for me. If you have baking questions, I'm here to answer if I could. Also, send in your recipes. I want to be able to go over the recipes with you guys. If there's a recipe that you are struggling with, feel free to drop me the recipe. You can send it to me at needtoknowpod@gmail.com, and I will definitely try to look it over and give my feedback so we can get you on the right path. It may be that you have to change that recipe, and just let me just say I don't want to review recipes so you can use my recipe. I'm not saying that, but I just want to let you know what could be wrong with that recipe. Um and another fun fact, I give out some recipes, but not all, because unless you really know what you're doing, you can take my recipe and have disastrous results and say, "Well, I took chef's recipe and it wasn't good." So, but yeah. So let's see. What is our safety tip? Food safety tip time, right? So what is our food safety tip? So for this episode, my food safety tip is to uh know where you're going to eat. There are a lot of places here in New York City, a lot of places that have C ratings, and we don't know about it. So just to know where you're going to eat, if you can, like look at the ratings. The ratings are for consumers. I want to see what the health department is saying. There are a lot of restaurants out here, specifically one pizza store out here that continues to get C's year after year, which indicates to me that one, you don't care about your consumers. Two, your staff isn't trained. Three, like how dare you, right? And I know that I couldn't set up shop in somebody else's neighborhood and get C's all across the board, like every year, and stay open. Yeah, I could not. And how dare you come into our community and do that? So yeah, know what you're eating. Because I do believe that people should be trained in food safety if you're going to work in that industry. And here in New York City, uh you only need to have one person on duty that is trained in food safety. But if you're not training your staff, then you put the public at risk. And that's what happened. That's how you have outbreaks. All it takes is two people to get sick from the same thing, and that's considered an outbreak. So um yeah, let's not do that, and let's be mindful of where we eat, right? And if maybe that'll send a message that I'm not going to continue. And also, if you are in a city or town that requires that you have the food grading, make sure that their grading is posted. Some really well-known places out here in New York have C ratings and their sign is not posted. Now, I don't want to be the one to out them or make a report, but like how dare you? But what we can do is not eat there. There is a very well-known chef here in New York City who has a restaurant. I don't know if she's in New York, but I know she has a restaurant here in the heart of New York City with a C rating. And yeah, very well known and has a C rating. And I'm not saying it's her, but it could be her staff. It could be her training. If everyone is not on the same page when it comes to food safety, then you end up with a C. But meanwhile, you go on TV and you are judging and rating people and have all these shows, and you could potentially be making consumers sick. And I don't understand why they're allowed to operate with C ratings. But that's me, right? That's me being I'm a food safety fanatic, so there's that. But well, that is it, guys, for this episode of Need to Know Pod with me, your girl Chef Sahira. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope you have enjoyed. In the next episode, I definitely want to tackle accuracy. Accuracy and also like how to perfect your recipe or just your baking craft. So yeah, please, if you like uh this episode, if you are enjoying Need to Know Pod, please leave me a review. I would definitely appreciate that. Like it, share it, follow us on all your I what do you call it? Follow us on all your podcast platforms. And spread the word. Let them know that they need to know that they need to be watching or listening to this podcast. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.
What to do with that dough? Let the chef show you. You need to know what to do with that dough. Let the chef show you.